All right, SAP Digital Manufacturing and Assessment, the Post-Mortem with the Advisory Board, take 0. All right, so today is June 15th, 2023. Over the last month, if you've been following our content at all, you know that we started engaging with SAP Digital Manufacturing Group, specifically Salvatore Castro, who is the product owner of digital manufacturing for SAP, about a month ago. This session here is members of the Industry 4.0 community kind of coming together and giving an assessment of what we've learned about SAP digital manufacturing, SAP in general over the last month or so, give or take, and kind of our unfettered opinions after, I think, what it is now 4 different conversations with SAP. And so with that, I'm going to, starting with JP, we'll just kind of go around the group real quick and have everyone introduce themselves. So JP, go ahead, man.
Hi, everybody. It's Jean Polmanez, Technical Services Coordinator. I work for Chemical Fuel Manufacturing right now, oversee our operational technology that we have here at the plant, including MES installation that's mainly ignition-based, backed by SEPASOP. And that's it, yeah.
Awesome. John McKeon.
Very good. My name is John McKeown, founder and CEO of Galeris Industry Solutions here in Ireland, 4.0 system integrator here, deploying the principles of UNS, mostly in life sciences and now into other sectors. So yeah, we're up right here in Europe, been working with these guys for the last 5 years and enjoying it, the wild ride.
So John and I have had we're friends, but we've had a professional relationship since the founding of GIS. In fact, John reached out and was talking when he was starting the company. We had a bunch of conversations before when he was bootstrapping. So Henry Marini.
Hey guys, Henry. So I actually work for Kodak doing a bunch of different stuff. I wear many hats, from managing our ERP ecosystem, doing a lot of on the floor repairs for control systems, and I'm also a relatively new member to the community. Glad to be here.
Thanks, brother. Ricardo.
Hi, my name is Ricardo Carvalho. I'm the Chief Digital Officer of Cecil, which is a cement building materials manufacturer. We are headquartered in Portugal, but we have facilities in 5 different countries. And I'm basically leading the digital transformation.
And one of the OGs of the Industry 4.0 community, Mario.
Hi, Mario Ishikawa. I am the CTO of IIoT. It's a company based also in Portugal and with office in Brazil. So we have a product to help manufacturers on their efficiency, but we also, since the last 2 years, we also work as a 4.0 systems integrator. And yes, I've been in the part of the community, I believe, since the beginning of the Discord server.
In fact, I think you've been in essentially nearly every session we've ever done over the last 3 years.
Yeah, most of them. Yeah.
And Amro.
Yeah, my name is Amro. I'm from Egypt. I've been in this community like for 2 years. I'm currently working on small projects, especially for small and medium companies. Basically, I do the 2 things: the digital transformation assessments, and the other thing is educating the engineers in my country about the correct information about digital transformation, Industry 4.0, and defined namespace, and how to go forward the right way.
And Amro, you're doing that through university, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
My university, the university is my background, but I'm on my own.
Okay, got it.
But the university is it's supporting me in this. Yeah.
And we were actually going to have 2 others, Dr. Jeff Rankinen and Brian Pryby. Brian owns a systems integrator, and Jeff is I actually think he's the department head at Penn Tech College. I don't know for sure, but I think he is. He's the department head of automation and robotics at Penn Tech outside of Pittsburgh. And Jeff's been a member of the community for a couple of years, and he's creating like augmented education for systems integration and automation. And then Brian Pryby is a systems integrator. He's not here. They may jump in while we're recording, so I'm just going to go ahead and do their their introductions just in case they join after the fact. All right. So let's talk about the purpose here. So we've had 5 engagements with SAP Digital Manufacturing Group over the last 5 weeks. The 4 of those were meetings. Okay. So one was just a one-on-one meeting, myself with Salvatore Castro, who is he's a director at SAP, and he is the product owner for their digital manufacturing product, which formerly known as Digital Manufacturing Cloud. Okay. Then the second session was there was a one-on-one meeting. Then there was a second one-on-one meeting. Then we had invited Sam to present to our mastermind group last Friday. And then we did the podcast. So he did a 2 or 3 hour presentation. He brought in some members of SAP Digital Manufacturing, presented to the entire mastermind group. And then we had him on the podcast on Tuesday. Okay. So everybody who's on here has been part of the last 2 conversations, and they've been part of the original conversation that we had on LinkedIn, which I'm actually going to start where this whole thing started. So why are we talking about SAP Digital Manufacturing? So here's basically what happened. 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, members of the community, several members, John McKeon was one of them, but there were actually a handful of members who reached out saying, hey, listen, SAP is telling manufacturers that unified namespace doesn't scale, and that digital manufacturing cloud should be their infrastructure. They should use digital manufacturing cloud as their digital infrastructure. Walker, you need to craft a response to this. That's basically what happened. Okay. So and John was the first person to reach out, McKeon was, but there were 3 others who reached out. So there was this common thing happening. Jeff, you're welcome, brother. I actually did the introduction for you at the beginning of the recording. So I said, just in case Jeff jumps in or Brian jumps in. So here was the post that I put on LinkedIn that started the whole conversation, that started the conversation with SAP. So about 5 weeks ago, I wrote, I'll be shooting a private video today for members of Mastermind, which I have shot. I've actually shot a couple of them, to talk about enterprise scalability with unified namespace. A member reached out to ask us to help counter some things SAP salespeople have been telling clients about UNS scalability. It turns out it wasn't salespeople. It was Salvatore Castro who was actually saying that stuff. He openly acknowledged, yes, I'm the one who was saying it. He has since in our conversations acknowledged, yes, unified namespace scales. But at the time he was telling customers it wasn't. As most of you know, SAP has been pushing towards the plant floor. That's digital manufacturing in both MES and CMMS solutions. And their growth has been very slow. That's because they approach OT problems with an IT mindset, and it should be the other way around. So you start with the problem and you work your way back to the solution instead of starting with the tech and finding a market for it. So we leverage what SAP is good at. So we use SAP. We integrate with SAP all the time. Everyone here does. Master data model, SAP is very good at. They're very good at general ledger. They're very good at managing bill of materials. I would argue they're not very good at PLM, if I'm being honest with you, but they're very good at BOM. And then we integrate their solution into a unified namespace using business connectors. And then we map their BAPI, their business API, to the unified namespace via an SAP namespace. And then we reference SAP tags, so parameters in objects inside of SAP, into namespace topics in the unified namespace. Where you would normally leverage a message queue, okay, what we do is create a namespace for each message type. SAP sales engineers clearly do not understand this, okay? SAP is great for ERP, for specific business functions, but it is not a digital infrastructure. So that was sort of the money statement. I was saying, no, UNS is a digital infrastructure. SAP, you're comparing apples and oranges. SAP is not digital infrastructure. So, and I closed with, not only does UNS scale across an enterprise, it is actually scalable with a shorter time to value, with less capital expenditure than leveraging a solution stack like SAP, OSI Pi, with ThingWorks, Rockwell Connected Enterprise, with Plant Packs, or Innovation Suite, et cetera, et cetera. So if SAP wants to have a rep come on our podcast to discuss, the invitation is open. Digital infrastructure for digitally mature companies is built on technology, not solutions. The legacy companies just don't get it. That started a whole conversation. Sam engaged in that LinkedIn conversation. Rick Bellotta, who Sam and Rick go back 20 years, said, hey, Sam, you and Walker need to talk. So then what followed behind that was a one-on-one conversation where Sam did a deep dive on digital manufacturing. It was a very heated conversation. It was myself, Michael Walker, who's one of our architects, Sam, and there was somebody else on the call. I can't remember who it was. And we went back and forth. It was respectful, but it was very heated. And one of the things that we stood firm on was UNS scales. And we showed him many examples. And clearly we were showing him some things about UNS he hadn't seen for the first time. He had seen for the first time. Also, he showed us some stuff that we had not seen about SAP digital manufacturing, specifically the integration suite and the production process designer, which are two elements of digital manufacturing. Okay. I did not walk away from that conversation with my mind changed about SAP. But what I did say was there's some things he says are coming in the roadmap that if they in fact deliver those things, it would mean that there would be a scenario where SAP could be the infrastructure for some business out there, but not the businesses we work with. Okay. So then we did the mastermind presentation, which all you guys saw, and then we had the podcast. All right. So with that, what are your guys' thoughts? So from the instantiation here of this conversation, all the way through everything you guys have seen, what is your takeaway from all these conversations, and where are your positions now? Where do you stand as it relates to SAP digital manufacturing? And does anybody want to volunteer to chime in first? We'll start with McKeon since he put. So John, go ahead first.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I need to go back a little bit of time. I came across SAP first in 1991 when I was in aviation, right? They landed in Ireland and they were only breaking out. But everywhere they've gone, they've dominated anything they've dropped in on and tried to consume every point. I was only 22 back then, but I still remember the scars of it, right? But then if I moved on, I ran into them again in life sciences, okay? And in the days of serialization, and you said before, I was involved in packaging lines, you said that before. I was heavily involved and deeply passionate about serialization in life sciences. And once again, the common thing I always into, IT department forcing down an IT-driven architecture and solution down onto the plant floor. Like, it was so ridiculous. At one stage, people were saying, let's change all the PLCs for Windows-based products. Like, Christ almighty, like, that was insane, right? Sorry, you've opened up the gate now, so I'm having at it, right? Please. So, look, SAP is SAP. They're there. They're really good at the ERP system, and I don't swim in that space, nor do I want to swim in that space. I just want to feed it. You know me, myself, and the crew, and many people like us, we all operate at the plant floor level and into the plant, right? We're just trying to move data up. But from the technical perspective of SAP, it's not an issue. What we always see is this commercial behemoth, right? The 400-pound gorilla in the room that constantly, right? Anytime you try to engage them on an open mindset, it's their way or no way. And then it's all the sidebar customers or sidebar integrators or their approved integrators, right? It's a lock bar, and they charge clients an absolute fortune. And I'll take a sidebar there. What I was heavily involved in doing the commercial business cases for new manufacturing lines in the life sciences, where I had to struggle for 1, 2, 3, 7 million, right? I remember this clearly on an SAP and serialization. They could just go 1 bar, 2 bar, 6 bar, and that was it. There was a budget. So where's the scars coming from? Conflict of understanding of an IT and OT space. Right. Now, SAP, I'll end with this. SAP, yeah. I have yet to see and look under the hood of what was the DMC, right? It's not something I get to look at because I'm not in the inner circle. Right. Right. I'm not going to they're not going to let us near.
And by the way, I told Sam that what I said to Sam when he was showing me this stuff, I'm like, Sam, you're only showing this to me because I have a big audience. You're not going and presenting this to everyone. Like you're taking the time because I have a big audience, and that's a problem. It's a problem that I have to, it has to be me for you to present this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The last point is, the last thing, you summed it all up, all of it, and this mention about the MQTT connector. Right. And there's a couple of sidebar discussions that I had with a couple of people here.
By the way, we will get to that piece. We're going to talk about that in detail.
But that was it. That was the last hope. The rest for me was, yeah, we're here and we're still, same as in when days of serialization, we're still going to drive to the line.
Is there have you seen anything in the conversation? So you sat through hours and hours of conversations over the last week, right? Probably 4.5 hours with SAP. You've heard everything. Do you have anything to lead you to believe that SAP isn't going to conduct themselves like the bully that they have in the past? Bully is the word that you used in private conversation.
Yeah,
right?
but it is like the 400-pound gorilla in the room, right?
Okay.
You know, open discussion, not sure. I don't see evidence of it. I live in hope, but
Okay.
I don't see evidence of it.
Henry, so for those who are watching and those who don't know the community, basically we have three groups represented here. You have end users in Ricardo, Henry, and JP. You have integrators in Mario, McKeon, and myself. And then you have education in Rankinen, Amro, and myself. Okay, so there's three groups here. That's we selected. We were looking for those three types of voices for this. Henry, go ahead. So you're in the end user. You have a lot of experience working with SAP. What are your thoughts?
So just to keep it concise, to specifically for two parts, specifically answering the question of feedback about DMC, I think first, I appreciate that you brought on Sam and you made him comfortable enough to at least engage in the conversation. I appreciate that you went in with a good faith environment and you gave due diligence and did research. And specifically as it relates to DMC, I am 100% with you, specifically and exclusively only that it will absolutely be a positive game changer for an extremely small niche, and for the environment that it will be successful has to be exceptionally simple and really stupid easy.
Yes.
The last point I'll make on that part, if anybody here has is either a SAP shop or has access to the open SAP courses, if you actually take a look at the training they offer for DMC, they don't call it that specifically, but you get to see videos of them playing with the flow diagram they made for their process creator. Two things about that. Number one, it looks like a shittier version of the Power Automate suite from Microsoft.
By the way, that was my first. It's funny you say that, was literally my first thought when I saw it.
Number two, they definitely stole from the Power Apps ecosystem. And number three, even the example they use in the course itself is for an exceptionally small mom and pop shop where they only make trophies, and the trophies are cut to one specific size. And it's very easy to see, especially for anybody who's ever used the Power platform. You change one thing and it is literally digital thread. There's an escalation and a cascade of a bunch of different other changes you have to make. So that's the first part. The second part, as far as the future I see with SAP, I shared this with John McKeon, and I agree with him that I remain hopeful about the future. But Walker, I'm going to tell you right now, what I see this is nothing more than Sam very well as an individual might be super bright and talented. I generally just see him most likely being used as a prop to sell and hopefully deliver on this MQTT connector Lite, and then ultimately use this as yet another tool to further lure in manufacturers and other organizations that truly don't understand the work that we do and the complexity it takes to be a true digital organization. And it's just a front. It is literally the 3 E's live, happening in our faces real time. And that's where I'll end it with that.
I want to come back to that here down the road, okay? Because if there's an authority here who can speak to the experience of what it's like dealing with SAP as an end user, it's you have that experience. Ricardo. So Ricardo, your experience is more, you're going through this journey right now because you're chief digital officer at Cecil. This is new, right? You're a year in to your engagement. So you're at the beginning of, and you're having to make a lot of these decisions about architecture. You're having to make a lot of these decisions about, do I go solution centric? Which solution should I use? Which technology should I adopt? Right. So from your perspective, Ricardo, what are your thoughts?
So first thing, we have an SAP shop here where I stand, and my previous life, I worked 11 years in oil and gas, and we had probably the largest SAP implementation in the world. So SAP is I'm no stranger to SAP. Good things and bad things, like everything, it has goods and bads. Yeah. Now, what I've seen was, first, I haven't seen anything particularly impressive in what I've seen, okay? From an end user perspective, in my simplistic view, I haven't seen anything that impressed me. I mean, yeah, there are different DMCs with different things. The MQTT sounds very, very good, but when I poked the bear, it was going to be closed.
Yeah.
I needed to buy their tools to have the MQTT connector, so it basically has no use to me in that framework, unless they change that framework. So SAP is a closed monolith, and I haven't seen anything that tells me that they're going to do anything different, and that's worrying. Now, I agree with Henry. It was very, very useful to bring Sal, and I appreciate Sal talking to us, having exposure to it. What I felt was that whilst you had spent a lot of your time and cognitive power to understand what DMC was, I don't think the same happened in terms of them trying to understand what the UNS was.
I agree.
There was a lot of things that they didn't grasp, which also compromised their answers, and that's a problem. Okay. Now, from an end user perspective, what do I want from SAP? I want to be able to choose the bits from the SAP ecosystem that I want, that either they're good or that they are particularly useful into my ecosystem. What I don't want is to choose SAP because everything is integrated with SAP. That's what I don't want. That's why I choose the UNS architecture, because it gives me that flexibility. If I want to use this bit, I will connect through the UNS and I will be able to integrate it in an easy way and flexible way. What I'm seeing from SAP from that presentation, it doesn't give me any assurance that they're going to be open architecture enough for me to be able to choose the best bits that they will produce now and in the future and connect to my ecosystem. It's kind of a all or nothing, and that I'm not for it. I don't think that's appropriate.
And let me say this before I'm going to bring JP in to hear his thoughts. I want to talk about the MQTT connector for those who missed these presentations. Okay, the part of the digital manufacturing. So digital manufacturing cloud is a suite of solutions that is an addition to the SAP ERP ecosystem. And the idea is, if you take digital manufacturing cloud with BTP is the underlying technology of digital manufacturing cloud, you can take that and you can bolt that onto S/4HANA, and you should be able to easily consume back and forth between ERP functions and manufacturing functions. Now, Henry already pointed out a very serious deficiency in the architecture. Okay, and that is, it is very much not additive context, although there are elements of additive context. It is very much digital thread in the way that they demoed it to us. So in the way that they were demoing it us, it was very much a digital thread approach, number one. Number two, MQTT is one of the underlying technologies they're using to communicate within their infrastructure. But there was a question. One of my first questions was, are you going to have an external MQTT connector? Sam said, yes, we're developing it in the fourth quarter of this year. And when I asked the question, will there be any limitations to it? This was in the private conversation. He deferred. He did not answer it directly. John McKeon also asked the same question. Ricardo asked the same question in Mastermind. Everyone was asking the same question, and there was no direct answer. Even at one point in the podcast, McKeon said, answer the question. He said, he literally typed in the chat, answer the question. So there was no direct answer. Now, to Sam's credit, and I want to be very fair to Sam, because of all the executives I've worked with these vendors, he's been the most gracious. Okay. I mean, for a guy who was, he was incredibly gracious with his time. And I want to be incredibly fair to Sam. He answers to people. I own the company. There's no one who's going to yell at me but my customer. There are people he answers to at SAP, and he's speaking for a corporation. He's not speaking for Sam. Okay. So I want, obviously he tried to walk a very fine line with his answer with giving a non-answer. Okay. So I want to be fair to him there. All right, JP, your take on the state, has your mindset changed at all?
I mean, maybe I'll be a little bit more contrarian to the current views, but in largely I agree with Henri, Jim, or John, and Ricardo. I would sit there and say sort of one takeaway I would sit there and look back on is like we did a big review. I would sit there and say back in 2016, we reviewed everybody's MES, right? And sat there and said, which way are we going to go, right? And we reviewed SAP MES at that time because we own the licensing for it. So it was like, well, if we own the licensing, but you know, the development costs would have been through the roof, right?
Yeah.
And we all know that. And that's why we didn't go down that path. But you know, talking with Sam, you know, looking at DMC as sort of it is, you know, standalone capable, right? So I mean,
it doesn't have to be bolted onto S/4HANA. That, by the way, that's a huge departure from other SAP extended offerings. That is one of the things that's different. It does stand alone. DMC does.
and to me, I thought that was a huge thing, right? Like, to me, that was sort of a huge thing to talk about because that sort of acknowledges, you know, where things are going within the marketplace, right? And so it gives them the ability to sit there and go in maybe where they don't have ERP or whatever. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but again, much like everybody else, let's get under the hood, right? Because the reason why I found that interesting, because it does potentially crack open the door to sit there and say, you know, traditionally ERP is owned by IT, all the governance around ERP for obvious reasons, and I get that, but does that allow you, you know, IT to let go of the reins a little bit more in the MES space, right? And give, let's say, the OT people who are the subject matter experts of that topic more ownership around that, and then does that lead to better adoption or whatever? But again, it's all get underneath the hood, and like Henri was pointing out, you know, if you can only sit there and duplicate simple manufacturing processes, then you're pretty much screwed anyways.
Well, let me ask you guys this question. I'm gonna go to Mario here because there's a conversation. There were a couple of conversations going on behind the scenes. One, McKeon is being introduced to Sam, and he's going to be having his own, you know, conversations. And there's an email thread that I was on with Mario and Sam, where Mario had asked a question at the end of the podcast we didn't get a chance to ask. So it was literally right, or he ended in the last 10 minutes, and we never could ask Sam about it. So what we did was Cheryl sent an email thread afterwards and included Mario's questions, copied Mario on it, copied Sam on it, and Sam came back with a response, and it was all centered around artificial intelligence, right? Machine learning and AI. So what I want to do is ask Mario this. Mario, prior to Sam's response, you know, what is your take? You've listened to all the conversations. Where is your head at when it comes to digital manufacturing from SAP? And then number two, do you want to comment a little bit on why you asked the questions you did? Because no one else asked those questions. Clearly you were doing research other people weren't doing. And number two, what was your take on Sam's response to the questions you asked?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, actually, during the mastermind, I couldn't actually be the entire session, so there much of it that I actually didn't follow. Okay, but I'll mention more about my question, and my question actually was a comment in the end of the podcast, basically. What's the roadmap, or what's the plan that SAP has to let's say in this movement that Microsoft is doing very strongly, and Microsoft is very strong. They are making very interesting offerings on Dynamics, the Dynamics 365. So it's no longer a very expensive product. Now it's almost like Power BI Pro. You can buy for just one user. You can start paying like $40, for example.
Copilot integration. Copilot.
Yep. So, for example, there's an example that shows a user. Let's say he needs to send an email to a supplier about a work order he's looking, or a purchase order, and just because he's on that page, he can actually open a panel, and the Copilot starts writing the email to the right person, describing the correct purchase order numbers, and that goes to Outlook. So I think my question is, Microsoft with this thing of, let's say, because of Azure or Microsoft Active Directory and Office 365, Microsoft has a very big and sometimes even unfair advantage on enterprise tools. I see, especially now that they are adding Copilot on everything.
I want to add two other ones: Excel and OneNote.
Yeah. Sure.
So Excel, because everyone is, I mean, it's crazy how much OneNote has exploded. Everybody uses OneNote for their note-taking application. And obviously everyone's been using Excel to pivot data and create dashboards and stuff. They have a huge advantage because they're connected to us all day. We're not connected to SAP all day, right?
Yep.
But,
and my question was really out of curiosity, really, because I can see, in my opinion, Microsoft is a very large corporation. They are very good on what they do. They have this advantage that I said, let's say they are in the operating systems on every desktop. They are on the office tools. They are on everything, email, and also they have ERP. And traditionally, SAP has always been an ERP company. So how can they leverage their own company by doing this? I think they are doing some things like, for example, I have been using for some prototypes the AppGyver that they bought. And it surprised me actually when they bought, because AppGyver was not a big company like Mendix, for example, that was bought by Siemens. I was expecting SAP to buy a more mature product in the level of Mendix, for example. So I agree, for example, when I mentioned about the Power Automate, let's say in a
it was the first
worst version. Yeah.
It's funny,
Yeah,
but Henry, it was the first thing I thought of.
But I agree. Let's say I also think the same way for Power Apps. So the way Power Apps, if you think Power Apps integrated as, let's say, if you have ERP, if you have MES, but there are several other things that you don't solve in your corporation, you can actually really do that very, very easily, very quickly, and efficiently with Power Apps and Power Automate. And if you're going to use Copilot and you already use Dynamics and Office, I think the advantage is enormous, you know.
So are you a believer? Are you a believer in the potential of digital manufacturing? Are you in wait and see, or are you not a believer?
Oh, about their product, actually, I need more to understand better. I really don't have, let's say, a solid opinion, especially when it comes to integrating with, let's say, large volume data from machines, for example, because
right.
We know they are good. They can be good working with, let's say, mostly input data, manually input data. But what many customers they actually want is to have the downtime getting logged automatically, things like that. I
gotta be honest with you, when I was looking at, so there are two elements that, for those of you who haven't watched the videos yet, there's two elements of digital manufacturing offering from SAP, formerly Digital Manufacturing Cloud. By the way, I wish people would get their names settled and just stick with the names. Okay. But the two things stand out. The Production Process Designer, which is very similar to Power Automate. I wasn't going to make the connection publicly, but since Henry brought it up, we'll go ahead. That's the first thing I thought of. I actually thought this is almost like step 7 and Power Automate had a baby. That's literally what I thought. Okay. When I looked at it. All right. So, but here's Production Process Designer is basically business logic, but native to SAP. That's what Production Process Designer is. You can basically drop objects into a workflow, and that object is an SAP object. So you, in theory, because everything is connected via BTP, which is their infrastructure, you can take an object from the ERP system. You can take an object from their DM edge, the digital manufacturing edge, and you can have them work together, right? You could use a machine trigger to insert a license tag into some ERP object, right? In theory, you could do that. Now, I see that theoretically, because when they showed us the data behind the hood, it was very elementary. So it wasn't, I didn't look at it thinking, oh, wow, this is a tool a power user would use. However, I'm giving credit that it's a very young product. Okay. Number 2, it's the integration suite. There's a module in Digital Manufacturing Cloud that is called the integration suite, which basically pieces everything together. Those two elements, I think, are the most important elements in Digital Manufacturing Cloud. However, it is clear that SAP wants to own the stack still. Like it clearly they developed these technologies not to interoperate with existing infrastructures, but to become your solution in your business. Obviously, that's Henry, you wanted to, and then Jeff Rankin, and I want to ask Jeff and Amaro, I wanted to ask you guys, your take after, because obviously you guys don't deal with SAP a lot in terms of integration. You're on the education side. But after sitting through these conversations, what was your takeaway? But Henry, go ahead.
Just two very short comments. For the process designer and what it aims to do, why go closed when open source ones like Node-RED already do what they do and far better and are mature and don't have to wait for some other, unknown intentions for what a roadmap might be. And number two, I think it's exceptionally easy for a lot of technology-minded folks like us to often forget that products don't just simply sell themselves. The DMC will be sold by SAP, whether it be directly through some sort of communications to their channel partners, who will then ultimately sell to the end customer, or whether it be through other means of market education in order to get the end customer to buy into the DMC. So I just put that out there. Obviously, we have SaaS tools that we can buy. I'm not talking about that subscription-based model where we can instantly pull something off the shelf. But what I'm saying is fundamentally, the reason why people are drawn to even pursuing that route is because of other people who have influenced them to do so.
Agreed.
To a large degree.
All right, Jeff, we'll go with you first. What is your overall feel on SAP digital manufacturing after your observations?
Well, I'm reminded of, say, the Titanic, right? And the iceberg is ChatGPT. So these big companies that think that they're invincible, they have to understand that Tesla did Warp in 4 months with 250 employees.
Right.
So with ChatGPT, what team would you need to develop your own Warp in 4 months? 2.5 people, maybe a few more.
Right.
So I think it's incredibly, ridiculous for these big companies thinking that they're going to hold the market share in 12 months. And if they don't drop their pricing, like Microsoft, like you said, Walker, if these companies don't rethink their pricing and figure out the cost of new features are going to be way less.
Well, I asked Sam this. Okay. I mean, I think we're all in agreement that if you're developing software and you want to sell software, so to Henry's point, someone's got to convince you that software is worth something, right? They got to sell something to you. No one sells you a Tesla. There isn't a person who comes and makes a value proposition to you about a Tesla. Who sells the Tesla? The buyer. The buyer, and through conversations with other buyers. No, there's no salespeople calling you. You're doing it yourself. There's no trick to sucker you in to get you to the dealer, and then the dealer uses a bunch of games to get you to drive away with there's none of that, right? It's the same thing in software. Look at inductive automation. I look at inductive automation's model and I'm like, if there's anything that was brilliant, it was their go-to-market strategy. Their go-to-market strategy was get it in everyone's hands, not get it into the hands of the people who are paying for it. Get it into everyone's hands. And if 10% buy it, we can support the platform. 90% of all ignition installations are unlicensed. It's people it's you, Jeff, in the lab with your students, right? Well, except you're using Maker Edition, right? You have licenses because they've licenses.
No, they gave us full licenses, like 115 full licenses, yeah.
But if they hadn't, you would be using the unlicensed version. I asked Sam this question. Sam, what is SAP's strategy to put your software in everyone's hands? And and this was in the private conversation, and he didn't say anything. Because there was no strategy. The strategy was through the channel. Someone's got to sell it to you. Well, guess what? They're going to try to sell you everything else too. And they're going to leverage what you want to get you to buy something else. That isn't the way this works anymore. Mario doesn't put together solutions for his customers based on what the vendor's trying to sell him. He's piecing together through a common infrastructure the best solution for a customer.
I think
yes, JP, go ahead.
I think there's something else going on too, and then couple in the whole concept of UNS, right? But whether it's 5 years out, whether it's 10 years out, or 15 years out, I think from a software architecture or platform stance, we are driving towards the idea of business concepts and no more platforms.
Right.
Right. And so I need functional capability in these concepts.
Yes.
Right. And so I don't need to go to an
John calls it nodes. McKeon calls them nodes. I call them functions. You call them concepts. All the same thing.
Yeah. Right. And so, AP is a concept, but in software and whatnot. And I tend to look at it through the lens of, all the talk of what's happening at the upper layers with, data lakes and everything like that. But think of it in terms of knowledge. If I can express my business in digital knowledge, then all these software packages that I have slowly just shred away because I just express these concepts digitally, and then essentially have microservices sitting there deploying those concepts at scale, right? And so I see, whether it's 5 or 10 years down the road, the software landscape is going to look totally different than it does today.
Well, let me say this. I want to talk, and then I'm going to go to Mario here in a second. Because I want to drive home this point about the importance of open. Like, here's a question I wanted to ask SAP that I didn't. We're building virtual factory, right? And we have a viable virtual factory that will simulate, and you could teach people on virtual factory, right? By the end of the summer, we will have a fully integrated virtual factory, like all the way through ERP, quality, manufacturing, execution, the whole deal. And the whole vision with the way it's architected is to be able to give universities access to the virtual factory. So any school, any program could literally teach their students on virtual factory. And we're going to containerize it as well. So now what we can do is we can deploy virtual factory in a Docker container using Kubernetes to Pentech. We could deploy it anywhere. You could deploy it to any customer. So say you want to demonstrate to a customer what Industry 4 is, what digital transformation looks like, you can deploy it. That's what open is. And I wanted to ask the question, well, how do you do that with digital manufacturing from SAP? Because look what they had to do. They had to set up a remote connection to a lab somewhere in Pennsylvania with a camera set up with the things on the desk, right? And then he had to do a screen share. You know what I mean? Like they had to, that was like, I really felt like I was on a rotary telephone at that time. You know what I mean? I was asking the question, how would you do that? How would you do what we're trying to do with virtual factory with SAP digital manufacturing? And that's just one limitation. And by the way, I'm going to come into where I think SAP is taking the right steps here in a minute. But because I want to make sure, I want to be absolutely fair to Sam and SAP. But Mario, go ahead. And then we'll go to Amro on his thoughts.
Okay, no, I just wanted to add here, and because Jeff mentioned ChatGPT being the tip of the iceberg, and also you asked before what about his response, Sam's response. So I also want to be fair, because honestly, I got the response today. I didn't have enough time to go through it all. Yeah. But he mentioned about using ChatGPT integrated to SAP tools. But getting back to the point I was mentioning about the big advantage I see for Microsoft, and this is merely speculation from my side, okay? But I would say like this: if you integrate a ChatGPT on your product, you're being able to leverage this tool to understand your data in a way that's going to be easier. Let's say it's going to get insights from your data, things like this. But if Microsoft is not doing that, I think they should, because if you have such a tool like Copilot or ChatGPT, that with let's say its own model to understand how, let's say, dynamics work on the background, how Outlook works on the background, how Excel works on the background. So basically, they can do this integration very fast without having to program so many things. Because one thing that's pretty hard, if you have, for example,
a semantic translation. That's all it is. It's
exactly
a learning model for a semantic translation. That's all it is.
every time, for example, if you want to transfer work orders from an MES to ERP, you are working with two different data models and have to worry about how they talk to each other to, let's say, to do this translation in the unified namespace. And Microsoft could basically be doing that automatically with a tool such
Do you
as
know what I
ChatGPT.
do with? So one of the lessons we're doing later in the year in Mastermind is I'm going to show you what we're doing with ChatGPT with unified namespace. So how we're extending the unified namespace and defining functions. We're actually using an existing unified namespace broken into a JSON. So we have a little Python script that browses a unified namespace and converts it to a JSON. We feed that JSON into ChatGPT. And then we say we want to create a new function at this level. And using the structures we already have in the namespace, create me a function that gives me these parameters. And it spits out the JSON that we then convert back to a topical namespace, and then we transmit it that way. And it takes 10 seconds. So where we were doing functional design before from scratch, ChatGPT is able to look at the unified namespace as a JSON format and create a new function based on the way we've already designed things. So it's not like a new design. It is an extension of the existing design. Why? Because all JSON is language, right? That's all it is. And to your point, here's another thing I want to say about production process designer, which, by the way, I like about digital manufacturing. It was the part I was most impressed with. It's short in its capabilities, but it's a step in the right direction. And that, by the way, that's my assessment. Is SAP digital manufacturing ready for the big time? No. Is it a step in the right direction? It is. Do I think they're going to take all the other right steps they need to make? I'm not sure. I'm definitely not convinced that when the MQTT connector comes in fourth quarter, I'm going to be satisfied with what they built. I'm definitely not convinced. Okay. But I did look at production process design and I thought, what can I do here that I can't already do using HiByte? And now that HiByte added the REST data server, why would I want to use this? Like, why? I can do everything that's in production process designer in HiByte. The only difference is I can't just natively drop an SAP object onto the visualization. I have to create the SAP object, right? I have to create that in HiByte. Whereas in production process designer, I could just drop it into the flow. But I looked at it thinking, why? If you go and look at the pricing, right? And by the way, here's a step in the right direction for SAP. Some of their pricing is public now. Well, not, it's behind. You got to sign up and get a login. Then you can see pricing. But some of their pricing is published, and that's new. That's only in the last 2 years. That's a step in the right direction. Digital manufacturing is a step in the right direction. But I guess the real question is, do we think they're going to take further steps? And after the conversations, I'm not convinced they are. Yeah, go ahead, JP.
Not only that, but I mean, let's talk about actual applicability or whatever. Where this would work well is for large organizations that have large amounts of sites and that are running SAP ERP, are running, they're likely running their CMMS and SAP. They're likely using all SAP modules. And so it does make sense at some level of big scale, but the reality is actually being able to execute on that. There's a lot of value to sit there and have all that information together in one spot. There's a ton of value to that, but at what cost, right? For what end, right? Whereas, to your point, if you can sit there and solve a problem a different way and still be able to deliver 99% of the value, but it's not a contiguous ecosystem, right? And so at some high level, that's the selling point hey, it seems like it works up here, but it's for very high cost, very big dollar, right? And for all of the SMEs.
Here's the question. Can anybody on this call, would any of you be able to calculate total cost of ownership of using digital manufacturing cloud and S/4HANA in an infrastructure?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. There's no way you'd be able to calculate. You'd have to go with a high number that you hope you don't go over. Go ahead, Ricardo.
I would like to add another thing. So yes, big companies that will have big implementations of SAP will have some advantages because the integration is done. Yeah. But let's not forget about the disadvantages. Because they have big deployments of SAP, a lot of the times, guess what? The production line would like to have one special CMMS, but they can't. IT make them have the SAP one because they don't want to integrate with anything else. So you are losing effectiveness, you are losing sometimes even total cost of ownership, and you're losing flexibility. And guess what? A lot of companies, mine is not an exception, they grow by acquisition. When you acquire another company, guess what? Most of the times, even if they have SAP, it's going to be a different version or a different product. And you will have to go around it. And that company that is just bought and you want to bring inside, there will be between 1 or 2 years just struggling to keep up with what you have to integrate. That's not the way forward. That's not what we need for digital transformation. What we need for digital transformation is an environment and an ecosystem that allows me to build the pieces together. It's basically companies going from being buyers of solutions to builders of things, of different Lego types that you're joining together. And this is a big transformation for most of my peers in companies where being a buyer is a lot safer than being a builder. But I think it's a change that is also needed.
So here's two really good points. Then we're going to pull Amro in for his thoughts. All right. There's a question I get a lot from clients. Okay. In fact, I was in LA yesterday. So yesterday was a long travel day for me. I flew out to LA and I did a kickoff meeting for a DTMA. We have 3 members of our team out there. And this is for, they're like in packaging. They make corrugated cardboard, the company does. And one of the questions that was asked by the IT group was, well, what, right now we use 3 different tools for data analytics. Okay. How, in your architecture, which one do we pick? And I said, use all 3 of them. I mean, I get this question all the time. Like, we're working with one really large life sciences company, and they're like, across our organization, all over the globe, we have like 12 different analytics platforms. Which one do we have to settle on? And I said, don't settle on any of it. Use whatever you want to use. Write minimum technical requirements and tell them that it has to meet these minimum technical requirements, or they have to pay for the integration into the infrastructure. That's point number 1. Number 1 is, yes, infrastructure is what matters. Open infrastructure is what matters, and that's how you scale. Number 2, Ricardo, what you're talking about here, and this goes to the digital supply chain piece, M&A, right? M&A, we all agree, mergers and acquisitions is going to play a much bigger role in the economy over the next decade than it did in the last decade, right? I mean, we're going to see more mergers and acquisitions, not fewer. We're going to see more, right? Well, what is the number 1 headache? Ricardo, you work for a big organization. The number 1 headache in M&A is what? Onboarding your acquisition into your existing business infrastructure. It's not the people. It's
one of the largest draggers of value is that one. Is you're buying a company because you're thinking you're buying value, and actually sometimes you never see that value because integration never works.
Because there's all this capex in capital,
or it just goes on and forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so what unified namespace does, open technology, open architecture does, is it allows you to integrate to businesses in the digital supply chain the same way you onboard acquisitions in M&A. It's the same approach. The way I connect to the digital supply chain is the same way that I connect a new acquisition into my existing business infrastructure. I mean, we were trying to kill so many birds with that stone, right? Amro, go ahead. Your thoughts on SAP digital manufacturing after consuming all this content about it?
Yeah, I'll talk from another point of view.
Yeah.
Now, most of the companies, we go and assess their organization. They have the SAP ERP as the heart of the organization. It's everything, and the idea here is we want the organization to be on some common infrastructure or technology, and ERP just to be a node in the ecosystem.
Just a function.
Now it's hard. So yeah, now it's hard because ERP is everything, and it's like we will have UNS. The UNS will play along with other nodes, and then we have ERP alone because it's hard to integrate. Especially the most small and medium enterprises have legacy SAP ERP. So the transition will be way too expensive. And it doesn't play well with technology. So it's just
why do they have legacy? Why do they have legacy? This is the question you always have. People who we'll use Ignition as the example here. We'll just use Ignition because that's a platform, right? How many people do you go who have Ignition installed in their business have a version of Ignition that's 10 years old? And the answer is nobody. Nobody's got a version that's 10 years old. Everybody, you might find somebody who's 3 minor releases behind. So right now for 8.1.22, maybe they're running 8.1.18, but nobody is running 7.9. So no one's running 6.9. But how many people do you know are running ECC 6.3 or whatever, SAP, which by the way is nearly end of life. Okay, right? And what's the reason? You ask the question, why? Why is it if there were 10, there's 10 versions of SAP above that, right? Or whatever it is, whatever the number is, it's a lot. Why is it you got that one and not the one that's the newest? And the answer is the cost of moving to the latest technology. And if
exactly,
yeah. And by the way, the customer didn't know that when they onboarded with SAP. They didn't know that was going to be that sticker shock came after they were pot committed. They were already invested in the sticker shock. And you know what they say? We're going to ride this out to the very end and we'll worry about it when we migrate later. We'll run it until the server blows up and then we'll migrate it later. That is a problem. that is not,
that's a huge problem, right? And my focus whenever I talk, I try to focus on the small and medium sized manufacturers because I mean, Fortune 100, Fortune 500s, whatever, right?
That's only 5%. That's only 5% of all manufacturing.
Exactly. My whole point, right? And so, if you're sitting there working, squeezing the towel, trying to get every drip out of that towel, if you've gotten all the efficiencies out of your manufacturing process and you've done everything that you can, then where are you going next? And where you're going next is on the overhead and everything like that. And if it costs you $10 million to sit there and migrate an ERP instance, right? You don't want that, right? And so you're going to be sitting there trying to find ways to sit there and say, how do I reduce my costs on my overhead? Why does my infrastructure cost me so much to run, right? And so you're going to be going over overhead costs and whatnot.
JP, the question there is, especially when it doesn't need to cost you that much.
Exactly, right?
It is one thing when you are paying $10,000 a dose for a drug right after it came out of R&D. It is one thing where when you've invested $1 billion in developing a drug with seeing no return on it, it's one thing for the cost to be really high as soon as it's released. Technology has gotten cheaper, not more expensive. Why in God's name are companies? I mean, if you look at some of these pricing models, you're like, how does SAP even propose that with a straight face? I looked at some of these numbers. Okay, now, and some of their pricing's gotten better. Their integration suite's only like 10 grand per instance. I think DMC for one instance is about 50,000 or 12,000 a month, 60,000 a year. That's not ridiculous. Okay, for one instance, 60,000 a year is not absurd. Is it high? It's high, but it's not absurd. I'm used to seeing $250,000, 10 million a year, right? So that's not an absurd number. But technology has gotten cheaper, and the fact that these companies are still trying to, and I'm going to say it the way it is, they are fucking robbing their customers.
Well, sooner or later, TCO is going to be on somebody's right. Visibility, right? And I sit there, and especially, everybody's on the AI hype right now or whatever, but I firmly believe we are in this zone where, the 80s, 90s, and 2000s was, the exodus of blue collar workers, right? The next 10, 15 years is going to be the exodus of the white collar workers, right? And so you sit there and say these costs should be coming down and it should not be costing me this much to operate just an infrastructure.
All right, let me say a couple of things and then we'll take it home. All right, so number one, I want to say this again. Sam Castro has conducted himself in a way that few leaders of big behemoths conduct themselves. I'll be honest with you. Okay. He came in good faith. answered every question. He may not have answered every question directly. He certainly didn't answer every question directly, but he did answer every question. He responded to every email timely. I've had a chance to see the McKeon. He responded. He wrote a very comprehensive response to Mario's inquiry. Sam, we couldn't possibly have asked for a better representative from SAP. Okay, so and kudos to Sam for. Thank you to Rick Bellotta for making it happen. Rick is the one who put us together. Number two, my take is if anyone asks me this whole, by the way, we got SAP to acknowledge that UNS scales. We got them to acknowledge that Tesla Warp and Tesla's UNS is a superior infrastructure. They acknowledged that during the mastermind session, their own, I don't remember what the guy's name was, but even their own guy in digital manufacturing acknowledged that Warp and UNS were superior architectures. Okay. So, and scalable. Okay. I believe that Tesla or that SAP with their offering in digital manufacturing is a step in the right direction, but it's a very small step in the right direction. And for me, I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to really learn over the next 6 months. I'm going to really dive deep on digital manufacturing. I know S/4HANA really, really well. I know BTP really, really well. I don't know the digital manufacturing other than what I've learned in the last couple of weeks. And I've really done my homework. I've probably spent 60 hours researching. Okay. Because I wanted to make sure I was prepared when I met with Sam and that I wasn't going to get blindsided by anything. SAP is not infrastructure. Okay. Are there scenarios? Here's a scenario I could see where SAP digital manufacturing with S/4HANA could be your digital infrastructure. The small mom and pop startup that just came up off the ground and has nothing but equipment with PLCs on it. They have no infrastructure. They've got absolutely nothing. They're not even doing anything on Excel yet. That would be a good place where you might want to go one instance, spend $60,000 a year on digital manufacturing, and then $25,000 probably is what S/4HANA will cost you. And well, for someone that size, it's gonna cost you. So for a small mom and pop, say they got 10 assets. We're talking a little, 10 assets, right? So for someone like you, it's going to be, $250,000. I mean, it's per location, you're going to be spending $250,000 on the bottom end and 1.5 on the top end. So I question whether or not digital manufacturing makes sense for any large manufacturer. I really question whether it's going to work for a large manufacturer because I just don't see it as scalable yet. I'm in wait and see mode. I'm going to wait and see what they develop over the next 6 months, and I'm going to wait and see what the MQTT connector actually gives us come December. That's my position. And I'd like to close with your guys' positions, and we'll start with Ricardo. Your summary.
Well, I think it's unlikely that SAP is going to develop anything for the mums and pops companies. Their target is clearly the big corporations. So all those big corporations will the ones that will go for that solution is because they have everything. SAP and IT will make them go for that solution and not another one. From what I've seen, I haven't seen anything particularly innovative, to be honest. And I don't think, well, actually, Sam told us that the MQTT connector would only be available for people that would buy the
DMC. He said you got to have DMC.
Yeah. So am I going to
$60,000 a year commitment?
Exactly. Am I going to spend $60,000 because of the MQTT connector only? I doubt it. Right. So I don't see it. I'm less positive than you are. I think Sam was great. I agree completely with you. He was forthcoming. He was authentic as much as he could be, and he did acknowledge the UNS. I would prefer if he would go a bit more deeper in what UNS is than he was, but okay. But I mean, he was good in that respect. I'm not as confident in what SAP is doing in that regard. In other regards, I think they're taking a good step. So, for instance, if you talk about ERP, what they're doing in public cloud It's a lot more interesting of what they had before. I think it covers a lot of the problems that big corporations I had, like me, which have 20-year-old implementations with the old versions, etc. The public cloud is a big step forward in that direction. In terms of what I've seen from Sam and his team, I'm less positive.
Good. Let me ask this question before we'll go to Henry next. Show of hands here. Who thinks that if we continue to approach this the way that we've been approaching it, the engagement with SAP, which has been my strategy, we could positively impact SAP at least a step or two more open to more open architectures? Does anyone think that the investment, I'm investing a lot of political capital. That's why I've handled the relationship softly. I've tried to not alienate anyone, because I think if we could influence SAP through our community and through the concepts that we teach to go just even a little more open, that's a win.
I won't show hands, but I just say I'm going to have a crack at it. I'm doesn't mean I'm going to move a mountain, but I'm going to try and have a push. But
JP, do you think that's a yes? JP, you think we can?
Yeah, well, I think you can. I mean, sit there and take a look at what you've done just with unified namespace. I mean, you know what the Google Analytics are and everything like that. Everybody's sitting there.
You should see them over the last quarter. They've tripled. So from what I showed you guys in January, those numbers have tripled over the last quarter.
You can see it just with searches, right? Even searches that don't even include unified namespace as a phrase or whatever, and side searches that are bouncing into that, right? And so it's I mean, there's a lot of uptake there, and so why don't you think you could have some positive influence on an OEM software vendor, right?
Does everybody else agree that we could positive?
I agree, but I believe, let's say, I agree that we will start a good momentum, but the results will take longer to be seen because it's not easy, especially if we're talking about a major change, let's say in a major product. It takes like 2 years at least for this to have an impact.
It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks too. And SAP's been doing things a specific way for a very long time.
I don't think it hurts what we've done, but I don't think it will move SAP. I think the only thing that moves SAP is their customers. So if their customers start to apply the UNS architecture, that will move them. But until then, they won't.
Yeah, and Tesla was started 20 years ago, and they rose to the top. So SAP has maybe 10 years, and they're done if they don't, because Tesla's going to market Tesla Warp to all their suppliers, and
no question.
And
look at what's happened over the last 5 weeks. I talked about this in my presentation yesterday. So General Motors, Ford, EVgo, and the other two major charging infrastructure companies in the United States all came on board to adopt Tesla's ecosystem. And when I asked the client this, why is this significant? And they said, well, because they're going to get paid on the electricity. I said, no. How do you pay Tesla for charging on their infrastructure? And they said, and I said, through the Tesla app. And where is the Tesla app? It runs on Tesla Warp. So that means every single General Motors customer, every single Ford EV customer, every single BMW EV customer are all now part of the Tesla Warp ecosystem. Every one of them.
With an open invitation to Toyota.
With an open invitation to Toyota. That's right. I mean, it's crazy. All right, Henry, your thoughts, your summary. Where's your head at? I'm in wait and see mode, and I'm trying to influence SAP in the right direction.
For the overall future of what the DMC specifically holds, I'm also in wait and see, with slightly more leaning on the pessimistic side. To the final point, answering the question of whether we believe that you should continue expending political capital to try influencing a more positive and open architecture in SAP. I would say actually it's a much better use of your time, resources, as well as the community's time and resources, not just to do that for SAP, but instead take the approach of, if SAP can get and talk on our on a podcast and converse with our community, then why the fuck can't Rockwell? Why the fuck can't everybody else? If this big of a behemoth can do it, everybody else has no excuse. I mean, clearly that's what I think is the more effective approach. Obviously, if you have more money than God, you know, you're more than welcome to use that however you please, but that's my personal take. I think it'd be far more effective to expend it in a way that we get other folks that we typically disagree with to also come on board.
Yeah, Matt Paris said this in a LinkedIn post. Matt Paris posted and he said, I think it was related to the tulip visit. I can't remember the full context, but Matt said you have to wonder why it is the organizations that don't engage, you have to wonder why they don't. You need to ask yourself the question, why don't they? J Mac, Dr. McKeon, is your headphones dead? We'll go to Mario and then we'll come back to John.
Okay. I think my last comments is I brought the let's say more like a concern. I think Microsoft is having a big leap, a big advantage. So I appreciate the answer of Sam, and my concern is I really actually who is going to be in pair with Microsoft, you know. And speaking now about also the small manufacturers, I think Odoo is having a very big, also
huge
growth. Yeah,
having a
and
huge.
the way they are open. Yeah.
Odoo
So
is growing. I've been engaging with my sales rep in San Francisco, and I asked him what are Odoo's growth numbers like, and he said they're off the charts. So I agree with you 1,000% there, Mark.
Yeah, and if you have a very well, let's say, planned unified namespace and using their manufacturing suite, a small manufacturer might not even need an MES if you make the connectors correct.
Yep. We'll go to Rankin in here. So Jeff, your takeaway.
Well, from the educational point of view, you know, we want to teach the full automation stack, so we have to hit the ERP. So, I mean, Odoo is great. You mentioned Zoho. I mean, it's the buyer that's going to sell the packages. So, I mean, I'd like to touch on SAP, just like we teach Rockwell and Emerson and Siemens. We have to, because that's the installed base. But that's just, we can't just do that. We have to show the students, you know, what's up and coming, and it's up and coming incredibly fast. I still think that, I mean, I've got a couple businesses I'm building, right? I'm using QuickBooks, but it's homebrew, right? Why shouldn't I develop my own ERP? Look at Tesla, tell ChatGPT, okay, make my accounts receivable. Okay, now I need something for inventory. Now I need all those pieces that Odoo have. Why can't I just homebrew it myself? You know, I mean, with ChatGPT 5, maybe 7, but eventually it's going to be there. The apps are going to go like you're going to customize everything you need by just asking for it with good prompt engineering. That's my take on it.
Here's another point before we go to McKeon here, but here's a thing that I was talking about internally. When large organizations have to resort to not telling the truth in order to misrepresent the truth. Let's you know, put it in the middle. Either not tell the truth, just outright misrepresent the facts, or misrepresent the truth in order to make a compelling case for why you should go with their solution stack. That they are forced to do that every time. Okay. If they tell the truth, the facts, then the natural outcome is for you to go towards an open technology. And what I told our team internally is they have to resort to a misrepresentation of the truth. UNS doesn't scale, for example, or, you know, SAP can be a digital infrastructure, right? They have to resort to those types of statements in order to steer you back towards their monolith. All we have to do is make sure that people hear the truth. That's it. That they even consider the truth. That's all they got to do is consider it. You know what I mean? And if they're a reasonable person, they're going to choose the truth, right? And when I say truth, I don't mean absolute truth. I mean factual, factual truth. McKeon, go ahead. Your takeaway here, because I want to hear yours.
All right. Okay, I'm going to be a bit radical and very confrontational. Nothing new there. ERP, the future of ERP, I think, is that question in years to come. I would be aligned, my thought process on as you summarized, function nodes and concept, or I think JP called them concepts. So I think there'll be a shift in the technology. I do think the UNS has taken a hold, and the way, if things are simpler, things will advance quickly. I am a wait and see with respect to SAP. I also believe that SAP are, they're such a monster. Yeah, the bigger you are, you need more energy to feed yourself. So they're so large, and yes, they are so expensive, but it's unsustainable in the long term if there's a shift in the market. And they may be looking at the future and say, well, is the product profile in its current form in question? Is it sustainable? So that's why you summarized yourself with the DMZ being offered as a separate item, standalone item and capability. I'd say it may be testing the waters of potential changes in the next 5 to 10 years. But that's my close, that's my summary. I think there is a radical shift happening, whether we like it or not. And when there's a radical shift, there is disruption, there's people getting pissed off and upset, but that's the reality of life.
Good. Amro, yeah, we'll take it home with you.
Yeah, like Jeff said about the education stuff, because it's not open, you can't teach it. And the other thing is that I don't think the DMC will work for small and medium enterprises because it will be expensive. And the other thing that how will you recommend it if you didn't even try it? With just videos or training, or it will not work.
I would say I want to drive home 3 points, and then number one, I want to talk about the Microsoft thing. I agree with Mario wholeheartedly. Okay. Do I think that Microsoft is going to win with OpenAI, and that OpenAI is going to be the NLP or the LLM that we're all? No, I do not. I think it's going to be some other emerging solution, but they're going to do the most formative development. That's what I think, however, in other areas of Microsoft's business, they are just slamming home runs. Like when it comes to business application integration, give me another organization, on another company in the world other than Apple who is better at integrating their infrastructure. And there's no one. Okay. I mean, so Microsoft, now Dynamics 365 has been sort of a punchline, was a punchline for a while. It is not a punchline today. It comes up more and more and more when I'm looking at architectures. Dynamics 365 is the ERP recommendation more and more and more. I didn't even used to see it at all. It was just like a joke. And now over the last year, it's probably in a third of the architectures. Okay. So the Microsoft thing is one piece. Number two, there are two things that Sam said during conversations that I found telling. Number one, he acknowledged that SAP is a top-down approach. That is, they try to enter through the boardroom or the IT department and then deploy down. And we know digital transformation doesn't work that way, because it all starts about unlocking potential on the plant, not about creating some infrastructure in the data center, but unlocking potential on the plant floor. That's how you're successful. If you look at the companies that don't succeed and those who do, that is literally the binary. Okay. There's other binaries, but that's one of the key binaries. And then the last thing was, he talked about spurious data. This was a thing that really concerned me. You guys didn't, he believes that you should only collect, not just I don't think it's his belief, it's SAP's belief, that you only collect the data you have a use for. That is preposterous. If you were to bring Elon Musk, that's probably the primary reason they never even considered SAP. Because Elon's position and Jeff Bezos's position, and enter in any other transformative leader across Industry 4, all data matters. And SAP doesn't believe all data matters. And whether that's a business decision, hey, we know there's more integration costs associated with use case driven development versus infrastructure driven development, or whether they honestly believe not all data matters, only the stuff that you have a specific use for right now. It shows a complete lack of understanding of what digital is. It shows a complete lack of understanding. Our data scientist that we hired here, Justin, he said there's this adage in data science when it comes to data. He says the best time to start collecting data was 5 years ago. The second best time is today. All data. It's the old adage with a tree. He compares it to the tree. The best time to plant a tree was 5 years ago. The second best time is today. And it's the same thing with collecting all data. And I think SAP misses that point. And that's definitely one of the big takeaways I took from the conversations. Hey guys, I want to thank you guys for jumping on, giving your opinions here. I'm going to bring a close and then we're going to stay on because I want to find out, I'm going to ask your opinion on what you want us to do with this video. If this goes public, if this is a public video, please like, subscribe, comment down below. That really helps the algorithm a lot. Share it with somebody who might find it valuable. It's just internal. If we just share it with the community, I want to give a huge thanks to these guys taking time out of their day to do this summary. This is in the middle of a Thursday, so everyone's busy. Truly appreciate you guys taking the time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.